Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. On behalf of Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, Solidarity is Global Institute, and the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship at the American University of Beirut, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this discussion on the Amman Principles for National Mechanisms for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women and Girls. I'm Farah Daibes, and I'm a program manager of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung's Regional Political Feminism Program in the Middle East and North Africa. Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, or FES, is a German political foundation represented in over 100 countries across the world, where we cooperate with our partners on projects related to the values of social democracy, which are freedom, justice, and solidarity. We firmly believe that there is no social justice without gender justice, and that there is no gender justice without socio-economic and political reforms. Against this background, FES is working globally with feminist activists and organizations to drive these reforms and to ensure the integration of feminist perspectives and strategies into them. FES also aims to support the repoliticization of feminist movements and the elimination of systemic barriers that are slowing down or halting advancements towards gender justice. It is within this framework that we work together with our partner, Solidarity is Global Institute, SIGI in short, to develop and promote the Amman Principles project. SIGI is a feminist and human rights-based organization led by a group of Jordanian women who are committed to supporting other women through their diverse expertise in law, medical reproductive health, education, human rights, and development. SIGI believes that a more equal and inclusive society is possible through developmental approach that contributes to the elimination of all discrimination and violence against women and girls. One important tool to advance women's rights and gender justice are the so-called national mechanisms for gender equality and women's rights. These national mechanisms have been established in most countries across the world in the past few decades. They are tasked with institutionalizing, mainstreaming, and systemizing the principles of gender equality in public policies and in decision-making processes at all levels. These national mechanisms have taken great strides towards achieving gender justice, but despite the progress that has been made so far, many challenges are still hindering their ability to fulfill their mandates as imagined by feminists and women's rights defenders worldwide. Moreover, globalization, privatization, climate change, war, and conflict are changing the socioeconomic and political landscapes in countries across the globe, shifting the needs and required mandates of those national mechanisms. To address these challenges and accelerate the progress towards gender equality, FES and SIGI commenced a joint project last year that aims at developing a set of guiding principles and an accreditation framework for national mechanisms in line with the Paris Principles for Human Rights Institutions. Following research and various consultation meetings with relevant stakeholders, the Amman Principles were developed. Through several national, regional, and global discussions, we are now working on building solidarity and broad alliances that will enable us to advocate for the adoption of the Amman Principles on the global scale. Our vision is international recognition and adoption of the Amman Principles by the United Nations and its member states. I speak for both FES and SIGI when I say that we are very excited about today's discussion between our distinguished guest speakers, and thank the Asfari Institute for their support and for providing us with this platform to further advocate for the importance of the Amman Principles. I'm equally excited to introduce you to Lina Abu Habib, who will be our moderator for today. Lina is the director of the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship at AUB. She is a feminist activist and a researcher, and she is a dear friend and partner of our political feminism program. I wish you all a fruitful discussion and thank you for joining us today. Lina, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Farah. First of all, I want to welcome everybody. It's wonderful to have this conversation, this important conversation with you. Just a few things before we start, and I promise to be very quick. First of all, we have simultaneous interpretation. So we would like our speakers to use whatever language they're more comfortable with. Simultaneous interpretation, Arabic to English and vice versa, is available. Secondly, this initiative, there's no way for me to talk about the Amman principles without mentioning somebody who has been at the heart of the very idea of the Amman principles and who is actually closely connected to the Asfari Institute. Asma Khadr, a dear, dear friend, the founder of SIGI, and also, if I may say, it was also her brainwave that actually came up with the Amman principles, and actually one of the reasons why we are here discussing them today. As I said, Asma is a member of the Asfari Institute International Advisory Board. I send her all our love and good wishes, and my only regret is that we're not able to have this discussion in her presence, but soon, I hope. This conversation is recorded. It's going to remain alive on our website, hopefully on the FES website, on SIGI's website also. For our intent and purposes here at AUB, we will be using it as material for research for our students, but also to feed into other conversation and also to develop more kind of think pieces based on the discussion and based on the input of our amazing speakers today. And maybe I should preface the conversation by saying, you know, we all know the history of the national women machineries post-Beijing. It has been initially a demand by the global women's movement. The extent to which the national women's machineries have fulfilled these expectations varies greatly. I'm happy that we have with us Salma, whom I consider to be truly a success story. I'm afraid I can't say the same thing about other national women machineries, but honestly, Salma, I'm very happy that you're with us, and we would like to begin with you, basically to share with us your candid remarks, your candid insights on, you know, on the whole framework of national mechanisms in our region. You know, the progress, the background, the limitations, the ups and downs. What have been your main takeaway as the chair of the JNCW in Jordan? Over to you, and you have 15 minutes, Salma.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lina, for the introduction. And it's really, for me, you know, just heartwarming for you to hear your own reflection on our work, and hopefully we can do something despite all the challenges. And this would not have been possible without actually finding also supporters and believers in this concept. And also I want to start with really thanking SIGI and Ustaz Asma personally for taking this initiative. I think her experience coming from the different sides of all the working in the women movement, including being in the national, in leading JNCW for 8 years, or 7 years, is really came from her own experience, her own challenges, and her belief now that she is back in the civil society fronts to see that we still need a viable national machinery, that this is very important, but we need to really find a framework that ensures that it is an effective machinery. And I would like to thank Friedrich-Ebert and the Asfahani Center for its support for this initiative. And hopefully one day, it might take years, we will find, you know, we will have Amman principles adopted at a global level. And maybe we'll call them Asma Khadr's principles. And wish her all help. She's always in her hearts and minds and prayers. Well, Actually, I have to say, and just want to give you some background, when I was offered this position by Her Royal Highness, when Ustaz Asma moved over to the Independent Commission, Elections Commission, I had the doubts. It took me 2 weeks to actually take that position. I'm coming from the civil society, political, by the way, and a gender and development expert. And I had to start thinking, do I want to be there? I know the challenges of this organization. How far can we go? Knowing all these challenges that Amman Principles has actually summarized around clear titles. So basically, one of the first things that we need, and I remember I read some reports on national machineries, assessment of national machineries, specific reports on assessment of JNCW, and I thought that if we need to make an impact, we need to position the national machinery in the right place where it is not stepping on the toes of the civil society, and it has an impact on how the government is leading its role without being assimilated by the government, without giving any justification for the limitations of what the government is doing for women. And we need to actually have the civil society in our back, and we need to back the civil society through consensus building in order to advance women's rights. And we need to keep that independence. This concept of independence, I think, is at the core of having a healthy relation with civil society, which, I mean, I know we still have our challenges. I'm not saying that JNCW has managed, but we definitely have sensed the shift. And we need the independence which the principles bring in. And the case of JNCW has given us that opportunity. Although it actually, the case makes us weak at the same time, because we do not have the legal mandate. Now, we do not have a law, we do not even have a bylaw. All we have is a decision by the government, which makes the Her Royal Highness Princess Basma the chair of the committee. It's effectively a committee. And this committee has grown to become an institution. It started with maybe, when I came, there were maybe less than 9 people working here. Now we're 30. So, and at the same time, the mandate is big. So you have a huge mandate and you are small and you don't have funding. So that was what needed to be done when I started. I thought, okay, I spoke to Ustaz Asma at the time, and she told me the importance of the mandate. And every time I had a commission meeting, the committee meeting, we would go over, should it be a bylaw or should it be a law? And the law, we know that we will have resistance in the parliament. And the bylaw will put us under the control of the government. And then, so now we continue to work, and we focused on strengthening our positionality without the law, without the framework. Now, what did this give us at this moment? But of course, we'd like to have a system, a framework that continues to give us the mandate through a legislated system framework, because it gave us the ability to be independent, our positionality. JNCW would criticize while it gives the technical assistance and support for the government to mainstream gender in its work, to develop its national strategy, but this time with a huge participatory approach with the civil society, with the local community. So it did not adopt the government approach to doing strategies. It took us a year to be able to bring it out. We had to actually confront challenges from within the system with using the word, for example, equality. And yet we insisted on having them. So we're giving that technical assistance to the government to a point where the government now feels that if JNCW disappears, they will not be able to handle it. The donor community, even now, because the donor community has tried working directly with the government on gender, and they saw that the government gets the loan, and then the part where they supposed to be working on gender, there is no responsible entity for it. And those ministries do not even have the technical ability to implement that side of the work. So we became the technical supporters to the government to implement its gender equality commitments through loans through our support, because we have that ability. So again, now suddenly the government is intertwined with us, and the donors saw JNCW as really the technical go-to within the government to do that. But at the same time, we kept holding to our positionality when it comes to the government's dealing with gender equality, how far they are going in terms of gender equality discourse. Our demands continue to be with the civil society and sometimes above what the civil society is asking for. For example, for the abolishment of 308, at some point the civil society was willing for a compromise. And JNCW said, we're not compromising. It is abolishment. And this is what we want to go for. And that's the point, that you need to continue not to fall for this. And of course, to be honest, how is this reflected? That actually every time JNCW and me at the personal level make a position regarding not only women issues, human rights issues. For example, you cannot, and this is if we want to be to show our own accountability and transparency, I cannot ask for women rights when I see now that human rights are being violated for men, for young men. So we needed to also position that to say, when, for example, and just I will give you a few examples, we took a position when females were teachers were held by the police during demonstrations. You cannot say we want women, peace and security, and we want women in the police and the army, and then have this police, put women behind bars. Then you are contradicting the concept. And this is an issue that we're asking for an alignment for, pushing for that alignment. With the young men who are demonstrating against the agreement with Israel, we now, as we are launching our 16 days campaign on political violence on women and girls, women in public life, which we're covering not only women in high positions, but actually female activists. So we're talking that you cannot have a real viable women movement and women in positions if you are not actually giving female activists who are working for change, because leadership is being an agent of change. It's not only a woman in a political position, in a minister who is not adopting the women agenda. So we said, how are we going to push for something like that while you are putting young men in prison just because they are demonstrating? And this was said in an official launch of the event. So this, when you have this independence, but now so far, this independence, I am taking it from the fact that we do not have a Bible, and the fact that it's Princess Basma who could actually intervene, or maybe change the head of the JNCW, the Secretary General. People all, but that independence, it's because of that we don't have the Bible, and this is very important. So that's one thing, and then again, we focused on increasing our technical abilities, where we actually, the National Strategy for Women was in-house with the support of donors, but actually we're able to do these things. We are doing in-house work in supporting the government in gender mainstreaming, in developing their strategies, in reviewing all their other strategies in alignment. So they cannot just go to a consultant or a donor and tell them to do that. Now they have a national house that is able to do that for them. So we became indispensable in a technical manner. So this is when we talk about the principles when it comes to human resources, it's very important to make sure of that. Financial support. When we focused during the first 2-3 years on our positionality, on getting institutional capacity development from donors, not through finance, really building the capacity and the vision, we positioned ourselves and we became indispensable. So the government gave us $1 million for our funding. This year, we have pushed for another 100,000, and probably we asked for another 300,000. We get 100,000. Probably it's not officially out, but if we get that, it helps us, because our argument was that we need the money for our core budget. it is not projects. We are not an implementing agency. We need a core team that is able to do that. And that means you need more finance for core. This is not, the donors would not give you that money. It has to come from the government. So, and this is a reflection for the government that they are doing that. Quickly, I just want to say, because I talked about the concept of accountability and the importance. For example, when it comes to another principle, although there is the Human Rights Center, if you look at the reports of the Human Rights Center, you wouldn't find a lot of reporting coming to them on discrimination against women. So while we get calls all the time, we get reached out all the time, but we do not have that mandate. So we send to the government letters about discriminatory practices. And interestingly, of course, it depends on one ministry, who is in the cabinet, who's the prime minister. But there are times when the prime minister, there is a panic attack in the cabinet that JNCW sent that one ministry had a discriminatory practice, which means that now they're feeling that. So, but it is not mandated again. So we need to mandate that when we should get the discriminatory reports, okay, the Human Rights Center has to continue to have that role, but we follow up at the governmental level. We need to follow up at the governmental on that. Again, this partnership, this concept of partnership and working with women movement is core to our success. If we do not have an open, honest relationship with the women's civil society, of course, we know there are a lot of contradiction about the women movement and the concept of, women movement, but a lot has been achieved through partnerships with the civil society. We went on the streets, we had coalitions that had important success. And what JNCW made sure to do is not to be in the forefront, not to use its name, not to put logos, because to us, it was very important that it's the voices of women of Jordan who are asking for that. It is not about gaining who did what. The more we work across our differences and our diversity in support of specific women issues without competition, we will be able to apply, because I feel that the government, the parliament, all the conservative powers are trying, they feed on our division. And it's very important that we do not let them to divide us because of issues of funding, because of how the donors, and I think that there is a very important thing relating to how donors are sometimes contributing to competition and division among civil society and women movement and women machinery, because they sometimes don't know who to give the funding to. Sometimes they just give something that is more related to the women, to civil society. They think they should give it to JNCW, or give the women movement something that is really governmental and needs to be worked at the government level, which the civil society does not have access to. So they do not have the right vision to do that, and sometimes that backfires on us. Finally, one good sign I just want to wrap up with, although I have my own political position regarding the Royal Committee on Political Reform, JNCW, from a JNCW level, and from my side, as a person who believes in the Constitution and that reform should come through constitutional processes. However, the Royal Committee, we sent them a proposal to have in the Constitution, like in Egypt, something related, the establishment of a national machinery that ensures its independence, its financial resources, and unfortunately, that we proposed that in the Constitution. They did not take it into the Constitution, but they put it in the recommendations. And interestingly, we just received a letter from the cabinet, from the Prime Minister, with all these recommendations, asking the government and the relevant organizations within the government to put a plan for implementation. One of those is having a legislative framework for JNCW. So this means that there is an opening, there is a possibility that we can use, but the lessons learned from our experience, whether the successes or the failures that we still suffer from, because this, sometimes I just want to close with, I believe that we are dealt with by the government as their mistress. So when they want us to work for them, to do the job for them, so they could get funding or to show that they are doing well, they call us. Sometimes the calls are informal. Sometimes they ask for documents through WhatsApp, but they know that we are the go-to. But they don't want to actually recognize us as their legal wife. We don't want to be their legal wife, to be honest. we want to stay independent, but they need to recognize that we are their technical support, but at the same time, we have the ability to criticize and to have an independent position when it comes to women's rights and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Salma. Always a pleasure to hear you and to hear your commitment and your words coming from a place of passion. You mentioned something that has been, I think you've touched upon, that one of the main problematique in relation to national women machineries, which is, a confusion about the mandate. It is not an implementing agency. It is not an agency that is supposed to design and do project. It's not an agency that's supposed to have a hotline. It's supposed to be a bridge between civil society and between the government, and also represent and amplify the voices of civil society. And I think maybe one of the ways in which we could overcome this hurdle is this clarification of roles. So thank you so much. I turn to one of our most amazing feminists in the region, Mozen Hassan. I'm sure most of you would know Mozen. Mozen is, well, first and foremost, a feminist activist who's been working in the region and globally, and whose work and whose voice and her and the fights that she has been fighting have caused her quite a lot of trouble. So we're happy that you are with us, Mozen. Mozen is actually at the heart of creating Nazra for Feminist Studies, which is one of those organizations who are leaving a significant mark in the region, and also the Durriya Feminist Fund for Women, the first feminist fund for this region, and also the Beijing Coalition, a coalition of young feminists that is working on the follow-up of Beijing Plus 25, etc. So truly the right person to speak with us on another complex issue, which is, we can't forget the elephant in the room, which is, the impact of political instabilities and political challenges, especially in our region, on national women machineries. And I'm going to ask Mozen to share with us her comments about this subject. Again, also Mozen, you have 15 minutes.
شكرا يا لينا، شكرا للجميع على الدعوة. شكرا فرح والأصفري وشهد، علشان احنا طول الوقت بقالنا فترة طويلة بنتكلم، أنا وشهد على المشروع ده، سواء ما كنا بنتكلم على البروسيس في مصر أو في السودان. في الوقت ده احنا أنا واحدة من الستات اللي بفكر دلوقتي في الأستاذة أسماء خضر إنه ده جزء من السؤال حوالين الحركة دي في المنطقة دي طول الوقت، إن احنا في ستات غيرنا عملت حاجات معينة حتى لو هم مش موجودات معانا بأجسادهم دلوقتي، قلوبنا معاها، بس الأفكار والأدوات اللي بتستخدم بتكمل في مساحات مختلفة. وأظن زي ما بنقول كده، هو ده أثر الفراشة، هو ده اللي بنسيبه لناس تانية. النهارده اليوم العالمي للمدافعات عن حقوق الإنسان، فأظن إحنا محتاجات كلنا نقول لبعض كل سنة وإحنا طيبات، على إنه إحنا في يوم، أظن اليوم ده من الأيام اللي مهم نفكر نفسنا إن إحنا، خصوصا أظن النساء من منطقتنا، إن إحنا قد إيه بنواجه عقبات متعددة المراحل والليفلز، علشان نبقى موجودات بنقدم خطاب نسوي في منطقة زي دي فيها كل الظروف المتعلقة بالعام والخاص وإشكالياته. وأظن الموضوع النهاردة هو جزء من هذه الإشكاليات. أظن طول الوقت إحنا ما عزنا نفكر في سؤال الآليات الوطنية، هو في وجهة نظري هو سؤال حوالين احنا بنفكر ازاي في الحركة النسوية اصلا في منطقتنا، لانه جزء برضو من اللي تعودنا عليه نتيجة الاشكاليات السياسية المختلفة ونتيجة التعاملات المختلفة مع نساء ونسويات الحركة طول الوقت، انه كان في فصل شديد وكان في زي ما بنقول دايما كوبشن من حكومات ومن أشخاص ذوي سلطة في الأغلب هم رجال غير ديمقراطيين، إن هم يعتمدوا سؤال الحركة النسوية وسؤال النساء وقضاياهن. وده كان جزء من الإشكاليات أظن في مصر أو في دول تانية أما ابتدت الآليات الوطنية للظهور، لأنه الناس حست إن هي استكمال لمراحل من محاولة أخذ الأصوات المستقلة من الحركة وربط السؤال النسوي وسؤال قضايا النساء بسؤال أبوي بامتياز، إنه في يعني رجالة ذوي سلطة يمنحونا وقت ما يحبوا وما يمنحوناش وقت ما يحبوا. وأظن كمان الحاجات دي اتغيرت خلال 10 سنين اللي فاتوا في المنطقة في دول مختلفة نتيجة الاختلافات اللي حصلت، واللي هي مش دايما يعني التغييرات بتجيب حاجات كويسة، بس يعني التغيير خلق واقع جديد. الواقع الجديد هو طرح مرة تانية بعد سنوات من محاولات الدول والحكومات اللي أغلبها غير ديمقراطية للاستحواذ على قضايا النساء، فبقى حتى السؤال حوالين الآليات الوطنية والحركة بقى شيء مختلف. وأظن الحركة النسوية في المنطقة دي وفي مصر يعني، ودايما أنا بقول إن أنا فخورة إن أنا نسوية مصرية بصراحة، إن هي قدرت تخلق الصوت المستقل ده وتظهره، لأن هو برضو الناس بتحب تسمع اللي على مزاجها أغلب الوقت، فأصواتنا ما كانتش مسموعة بشكل كبير. وفي ده برضو نقاش حوالين الآليات الوطنية والنقاش، يعني أنا شكرا للأستاذ سلمى لما قالت إنه هذه الآليات هي مش آليات مش implementing bodies، لأن ده جزء من الإشكاليات طول الوقت حوالين الناس ما بتشوف الآليات الوطنية سواء إحنا عايزينها أو مش عايزينها، أو هي بتعمل إيه أو ما بتعملش إيه. أظن هو سؤال المانديت هو السؤال الأساسي اللي بيتمحور عليه سؤال الآليات الوطنية في المنطقة، واللي أنا بشوفه بصراحة من وجهة نظر ناشطة نسوية مستقلة ناحية الرؤية لسؤال الحركة النسوية بمداها الواسع. في الأغلب في منطقتنا ما تعودناش نشوف حركة نسوية واسعة، إحنا حبينا قوي كأننا بنعيد تنميط نفسنا زي ما الناس بتنمطنا إنه في مجموعة هم دول النسويات وغيرهم لأ. ونتيجة الإشكاليات وتداخل العام والخاص والسياسي والاستقرار، واللي هي الحركة النسوية في الأول هي حركة سياسية بامتياز، يعني لا يعني إن هي حزب سياسي بس إن هي لها أدوات سياسية تم الاختلاط لسنين طويلة حوالين دور ما نطلق عليه النسويات الدولة أو وجود آليات وطنية، أو السؤال حوالين هل الحركة دي هي حركة مستقلة بتخلق واقع بديل ولا هي بتأثر في السياسات وقوانين وبتأثر في خارج إطارها، وإن تأثير الحركة دي لا يعني بالضرورة عدد أكبر من النسويات على قد ما هو عدد أكبر من نساء يتم حمايتهن أو آليات أو قوانين خاصة بالنساء في منطقتنا. أظن إحنا لو دخلت الحركة النسوية، أظن المشروع ده يعني من المشاريع المهمة في النقاش حوالين النسوية السياسية، إن هو والسؤال يعني ده إن هو إن الناس تقعد مع بعضها وتتكلم عن الأدوار المختلفة، لأن خصوصا في إنه ده جزء من الإطار الحاكم الدولي لكل الدول اللي هي بتدخل فيه شئنا أم أبينا، فإزاي تدخل فيه من النقاشات الأكثر عمقا زي الأستاذ سلمى طرحتها. موضوع مثلا الموارد في الأول وفي الآخر جزء من تعاملنا طول الوقت ناحية قضايا النساء عموما، أو انتظارنا من الآليات الوطنية طول الوقت إنه يبقى في توفير للموارد، لأنه في الأول وفي الآخر ما الحركة بتطرح النقاش وبتحاول تغير أو رد فعل لينا، يعني إحنا كمجموعة قعدنا سنين نشتغل في قضايا العنف ضد النساء في مصر، خاصة العنف الجنسي، وفي المجال العام كان الرد طول الوقت حوالين إنه كل اللي إحنا بنطلبه ده محتاج كمية من الموارد هي مش خطرة على دماغ المشرع أو المنفذ جوه هذا النظام. والنظام كأنظمة مختلفة يعني عدت على مصر. السؤال الثاني هو كيف تكون الآليات الوطنية هي داعمة أو إن هي تأخذ كل النساء مع بعضها مش نوعية معينة. وده جزء ما أظن من الحاجات اللي احنا محتاجين نعيشها طول الوقت حوالين الآليات الوطنية، كيف إن هي تكون فعلا آلية وطنية قادرة على إن هي تمثل جميع النساء ولا تصبح أداة في يد أي شكل من أشكال النظام اللي هي متغيرة بأشكال مختلفة وتعبر عن شكل معين، كأننا برضو بنعيد تنميط النساء إن هو دول الستات الكويسة والستات اللي مش كويسة. في إشكاليات مثلا كتير في دولة زي مصر مثلا طول الوقت حوالين الآليات الوطنية في إن هي لا تتدخل في قضايا العديد من النساء لأنهن لا يطرحن الشكل الأمثل من ما يريد النظام في هذا الوقت، مثلا تقديمه عن أشكال النساء. مصر لسه يعني مصدرة استراتيجية وطنية لحقوق الإنسان وفيها جزء عن النساء، بس احنا دايما بنقول ان هو استراتيجية وطنية لحقوق الإنسان فيها جزء عن النساء وليس فيها ذكر للمدافعات عن حقوق الإنسان. وده جزء برضو من الإشكاليات طول الوقت حوالين الاستراتيجيات الوطنية لوجود الحركة. وعشان كده احنا يعني بنطلب كتير من الآليات الوطنية لأن احنا بنحس إن احنا we are missing كده في السيستم. فنلاقي الآليات الوطنية يقولوا لك مثلا احنا بنتكلم عن النساء عامة، الآليات الوطنية الخاصة بحقوق الإنسان أو بالعدالة الانتقالية في دول معينة أو كده بتتحدث بشكل عام عن الموضوع، وكأنه وجود هذه الحركة والمدافعات والنسوات. وأظن في يوم زي ده احنا محتاجات كمان نفكر في وجودنا جوه المنطقة دي وبره حوالين ازاي يبقى جزء من بروسيس كامل للسماع والنقاشات واستخدام كل الآليات في الآخر للوصول لهدف هو ان احنا ازاي يعني تتحسن الأحوال بأشكال مختلفة. فأظن إنه العديد من القضايا محتاجة تتناقش ناحية الآليات الوطنية بوجهة نظر يعني في وجهة نظري بوجهة نظر الحركة النسوية الواسعة. الحركة النسوية الواسعة اللي هي بتضم جميع من يطلقن على نفسهن نسويات مش بتقييمنا احنا، وازاي تكون الآلية الوطنية هي مكان للنقاش زي ما احنا بنقول طول الوقت يعني كنسويات بالبوزيشناليتي بتاعتها. محدش بيطلب من الآليات الوطنية ان هي تبقى جمعيات أهلية، بس كمان الآليات الوطنية محتاجة تشوف نفسها جوه البروسيس اللي في الأغلب واحنا فاهمين جدا في دول كتير في منطقتنا ما بيبقاش في حاجة داعمة لخطاب نسويات الدولة داخل الأنظمة، لأنه في الآخر يعني في مصر عندنا يقول لك أصل موضوع الستات ده بيكلف كتير، بيكلف فلوس ودوشة وزحمة ومعتادين محتاجين يسيبوا أماكنهم وكده، في الموضوع مرهق يعني، فمش دايما بيبقى مقبول. بس جزء من وجود آليات فاعلة مرتبطة بأنه زي ما هنقول آليات لها أنياب، يعني لها أنياب مش معنى أن هي متوحشة بمعنى التقليد عن النسويات، بس كمان بمعنى أنه مكاتب الشكاوى مثلا تبقى ليها آلية لتمثيل النساء مثلا، مش بس الحضور معاهم زي أي جمعية أهلية تانية. إنه يبقى السؤال حوالين mainstreaming الجندر بوليسز جوه الإدارات المختلفة، وكمان تجميع الاستراتيجيات المختلفة. يعني في دول كتير مثلا زي مصر فيها نقاش طول الوقت على إن إحنا بنعمل استراتيجية، بقالنا مثلا 5-6 سنين بنعمل استراتيجيات وطنية طول الوقت، بس هي الاستراتيجيات الوطنية طول الوقت هي مش متقاطعة مع بعضها، رغم إن هي ممكن تكون بتتحدث عن حاجات شبه بعضها، لكن ما فيش. وده أظن اللي هو ده دور الآليات الوطنية، إن هي تبقى جامعة لكل الأشكال دي علشان كمان ما يبقاش في دوبليكيشن وما يبقاش في كمان جزء من الإشكاليات طول الوقت المطروحة حوالين الريسورسز والموارد، اللي هو جزء من اهتمامنا مثلا في صندوق الدرية في النقاش حواليه لمين بتروح الموارد وعلى أي أساس، وهل بنعملها بشكل يعني بنبني فيها، ولا هي الفكرة ان احنا بنعمل scattered events and activities without seeing بقى ايه، ولا نشوف التصور الواسع اللي في الاول وفي الاخر هو ده اللي بيكمل وبيتبني عليه. كان ليا تجربة يعني في السودان السنة اللي فاتت حوالين ان احنا دخلنا في نقاشات يعني كحركة نسوية، يعني كنت جزء من الناس اللي بتساعد في الموضوع ده، انه ازاي تقوم مفوضية النوع في السودان، وازاي المفوضية دي ممكن يبقى لها دور زي ما حصل في دول تانية مثلا أقرب لأفريقيا جنوب الصحراء في المساحات بتاعت مش بس العدالة الانتقالية، بس التعافي من الحروب والآلام والعنف ضد النساء وإقرار السلام. يعني زي ما بتقوم مثلا الآلة الوطنية في أوغندا بحاجة زي كده يعني، أو ده. أظن التجربة اللي حصلت يعني في السودان يعني اللي أتمنى إن هي تكمل من غير الظروف المعقدة اللي حاصلة في السودان، إنه كان المشاركة من الأجيال المختلفة من النسويات اللي هم موجودات مش بس في القاعدة، يعني مش بس في الخرطوم، من أماكن مختلفة. كان فيه كمان إدراك إزاي إنه دي الرحلة النسوية على مساحات مختلفة. أنا آسفة أنا طولت، أنا آسفة جدا، بس هو يعني دي شوية الأفكار اللي كانت عندي، وشكرا تاني على الدعوة.
لا على الوقت مزن، شكرا كثير، شكرا كثير لك مزن. وبصراحة طرحت أنت قضية شوي يعني هلا عم بنسمعها أكثر وشوي مقلقة، يلي هي إنه أي قضايا بنرتاح لها وبالتالي بنمشي فيها يعني يلي ما في إشكال فيها. وكتير مقلق يعني هلا الديسكورس يلي بيحكي عن قضايا المرأة على مستويين، يعني التمكين اقتصادي والنساء داعيات السلام. هذا فيه إشكالية كبيرة، مش بس ريدكشنست يعني، بس نفس الوقت يعني نحن بنعرف انه هيدا حتى منه حتى the surface، يعني حتى ابعد عن السيرفس. so thank you for this. وكمان يعني ايه يعني الشعور بكل بلداننا انه ما في تقاطع بين شيء وشيء، يعني وكأنه كل آلية كل قضية هي ماشية لوحدها يعني ورايحة يعني على الله يعني ماشي على كل. شكرا كثير. I want to move to Dr. Ibtisam Al-Atiyat, but Dr. Ibtisam, before I move to you, I actually forgot something very important and unforgivable, which is to thank our very young colleagues, their commitment in making this happen. I'm very, very sorry. Shahid from SIGI, thank you so much. And my own colleague, Fatima Amro, also thank you ever so much for all the work that you have put in this. So thank you, both of you. Dr. Ibtisam is going to talk to us about the Amman principles. And I think we're all looking forward to understand the conceptual framework, but also what we can expect in terms of pushing the envelope further in relation to the role and the impact of national women machineries. تفضل Ibtisam, in whichever language you prefer.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for organizing this great panel. It's already addressed so many important issues. I am honored to represent SIGI today. SIGI was very well introduced by Farah and Lina. Thank you both very much. As a women's rights feminist organization in Jordan, this particular project falls within SIGI's commitment to women's human rights and women's dignity. The speakers before me, Dr. Salma and Muzn, addressed Muslim's reference to co-optation, the history of state feminism, the fact that state feminism is not new, that women's machineries in the region are simply a new generation, a step removed from earlier form of state feminism that we have witnessed in the Arab world. Post-colonialism it's an important lesson to critically reflect upon and understand. I really appreciate Dr. Salma's metaphor of the mistress, and it is very important also to appreciate her insistence not only on the intersectionality aspect of a national machinery's agenda, but her understanding that justice cannot stop at exclusive issues, particular issues, without taking into consideration how issues not only intersect, but they also overlap, and they're very much interdependent. Alina Abu Habib hinted at the dangerous discourse of economic empowerment. And I would like to also further emphasize this particular discourse because of its potential entanglement with neoliberal agendas and the neoliberalization of Arab states within the Arab world. It is again my greatest honor to introduce to you the Amman principles. The Amman principles, as I'm about to present them, are a set of 9 principles meant to enhance the efficacy and the autonomy of national machineries for gender equity and the advancement of women. They're not only meant to enhance the efficacy and the autonomy, but they're also meant to hold governments accountable to their commitments, particularly international commitments to the advancement of women and the establishment of gender equity. Another feature of the Amman principles, before I introduce them, is the fact that the Amman principles are modeled after the Paris principles for human rights mechanisms. We have, at the international feminist movement level, we have learned the hardest lessons throughout history, that when human rights are mentioned, their translation into policy and law is not necessarily always inclusive of women's issues, women's status, and considerate of women. So the Paris principles for human rights mechanisms needed to go further to reflect this sensitivity to women's and gender issues. So we found ourselves in a position where we had to work again to enhance the international human rights mechanisms by insisting on the creation of a framework that pays particular attention to women's rights and the enhancement of machineries working on women's rights. The Amman principles also address a particular point and carry a particular feature that is extremely significant in my view, that it comes from Arab feminists. And Arab feminists find themselves often fighting at 2 different fronts. Number one, fighting for justice within our regional but also national context. The other front that we're fighting on is this international but uniquely Western perception of us as passive victims of a particular cultural patriarchy and passive victims of our states. This initiative would prove to the world that Arab women and Arab feminists are particularly active in shaping international feminist movement agenda and enhancing women's status throughout the world. The Amman principles are based on research and based on consultations that we have held with feminists in Jordan, feminists in the region, but feminists around the world. This is one of a series of meetings that we've held to introduce and promote the Amman principles around the world, and gain your insights and your critical reflections about the Amman principles and the idea that we're proposing here, that we describe as the Amman principles for the enhancement of national machineries. The research we've conducted have yielded different results. On the positive note, the research we've conducted has very well established that there have been mechanisms established for gender equality and the advancement of women throughout the region, but also throughout the world. In certain cases, there were more than one mechanism that was established in a single country. So there would be, for instance, women's machinery in the form of a ministry or a form of a national commission or a high-level agency, but there will be also gender or women's advancement units throughout the government structures within different ministries. We have also noticed through our research that there have been numerous legislative reforms done throughout the Arab world in favor of advancing gender equality and gender justice. There also have been several monitoring and evaluation tools that were created throughout the Arab region. There have been attempts to produce disaggregated data, and there have been attempts to use gender disaggregated data in policy and law. We have also learned through research that there have been significant collaborations and coordinations between national machineries and civil society organizations. Those are general findings, the important feature of which that they exist in varying degrees within the Arab world. We've also found out that the national machineries throughout the region face significant challenges. Some of those challenges were presented by Dr. Salma, but also highlighted in Muzen's presentation. Some of those challenges include the lack of clarity and allocation of tasks and powers. There is an absence or weak political will in the different countries we've studied. There have been disparities in cooperation between women's organizations, the women's movement and the national machineries. There have been weakness and lack of qualified and experienced human resources. Insufficient financial resources was also addressed throughout our research as one of the main challenges, although there were attempts to produce gender disaggregated data, statistics and data is limited to varying degrees within the region. There is also weak or irregular monitoring of the actions of the government and in terms of their commitment to gender equality. There is also lack of accountability by bodies concerned with gender equality. There is no system of holding those mechanisms in place accountable to their mandate, to their purpose of being. There is also the challenge of cooperation and networking between the national mechanisms and civil society organizations throughout the region. again, those challenges are experienced to varying degrees throughout the region. From our consultations with feminists throughout the world, and this is one of the meetings we've held, we have noted that those experiences are not peculiar to the Arab region or to national mechanisms within the Arab world, that those challenges are shared almost universally, that national missionaries throughout the world struggle with the same challenges that we are that we're discussing here. Excuse me. So what are the Amman principles? Again, these 9 principles are meant to enhance and address those several challenges that we've discussed. The Amman principles include, as the first principle, the importance of referencing women's human rights as the general framework within which the national machinery needs to operate. So we need to emphasize commitment to human rights, women's human rights in particular. The second principle is related to the mandate. And the Amman principles suggest that the mandate for the national machinery, although needs to be restricted to commit particularly to gender justice and the advancement of women, it has to be wide enough to cover not only the vastness of women's issues in terms of where they would fit within policy and law and within the structure and hierarchy of the government, but also wide enough to allow for the national machinery to address intersectional issues and interdependent issues, the kind of issues that Dr. Selma discussed when she talked about the female teachers and the young male protesters who protested the agreement between the Jordanian government and the state of Israel. Number 3, institutional autonomy. The third principle insists on the institutional autonomy of the national machinery. There has always been a struggle for national machineries to establish boundaries between the national machinery and the government. The problem of co-optation is prominent throughout the region. So to establish that autonomy as a particular principle is very important for the Amman principles. The fourth principle is the principle also highlighted by the 2 speakers before me: independence guaranteed by the law. And this is a very important principle, that there should be a law that guarantees the independence of national machineries, and that law can be a specific law or better yet, independence enshrined in the Constitution. The fifth principle is about pluralism and diversity. Yes, this is very important for national missionaries to be able to reach out to constituencies beyond its conventional and traditional circles, to address again the criticism of elitism, the criticism of the women's movement being solely representative of middle-class, urban, educated women, but to emphasize the capacity of the national machineries to reach out to constituents beyond those particular stereotypical circles from within which the movement has always recruited. Sufficient resources is the sixth principle. And it is very important that the national missionaries have an allocated budget that doesn't fluctuate, as Dr. Salma emphasized, and those particular financial and technical resources need to be guaranteed at the level of the government. The seventh principle is related to granting the national missionaries adequate powers of investigation. So the fact that there have been violations of principles of equity, principles of gender justice, women's rights, and what have you, national missionaries need to be that place where investigation is possible, so that a fair and a just judgment is rendered over a situation, and whenever there is a violation, a remedy is being considered. The eighth principle is about building partnership and the capability of the national missionary to build partnerships, and those partnerships are primarily with the wider women's movement, but also with other civil society organizations active within a single country, but also active within the region and the international level. The ninth principle is one that we see of extreme importance, and it is related to the principle of resiliency in instances of crisis. This resiliency is very important because we've been experiencing, particularly in the past 2 years, a pandemic that requires the enhancement of national machinery's adaptability and capability to survive crises of this kind. Not only pandemics, but also political crises, economic crises, and what have you. So built-in resiliency is a very important principle that the Amman principles include, emphasize, and highlight. The Amman Principles Project proposes an accreditation process, and this accreditation process is proposed to transform those particular 9 principles that I've just introduced, transform them into measurable indicators. And those measurable indicators would entitle the national missionary to earn an accreditation status at an international level. We're proposing that the UN Women establishes a national mechanisms for gender equality unit, and it is this particular unit that takes as its mandate the responsibility of reviewing applications submitted by national missionaries throughout the world and granting them an accreditation status that would range from an A to a C, depending on their commitment to the 9 particular principles. The Amman principles are still general principles. There still needs to be work to translate them into concrete measurable indicators, and the hierarchy of the accreditation system also needs to be further elaborated on and worked on. What we hope from this meeting and what we hope from you is to engage with us critically about the different principles and about our approach to get them established and get them recognized at the UN level. And we're extremely grateful for giving us this particular platform to introduce this project, and grateful in advance for your critical engagement with what you've been presented with. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Doctora. Well, you know, what you have laid out, I'm glad that Huri is with us, because actually we really want to take this conversation. We want to take this conversation, you know, globally, and we want more. We want more. How should I say? Want more buy-in into these principles, and I think the principles from my end actually. Sorry, I was disturbed about something, but okay. We want a buy-in from different organizations. We want a buy-in that is global, and we want a process that is actually will be able to help us in going back to the idea of national women machineries as the feminists in our region and also elsewhere envisage it. And I'm glad that our next and last speaker, of course, last but not least, is Huri Godolekian. Huri is an amazing friend and a feminist. She is the chair of NGO CSW New York. We have been working closely with Huri in making the CSW a place that is accessible to feminists from the region, a place that is accessible to young feminists, to intersexual feminists. And there I say that, you know, one of our main aim is to rid the space from patriarchy, because I think we've had enough of this. And while Dr. Ebtissam was talking, I have to confess that Huri and I were basically talking about how do we take this conversation further globally. And I want to invite Huri to jump in and also to tell us to position this conversation and to position the conversation on the national women machineries within the context of the post-GEF Gender Equality Forum era, might I say. So over to you, Huri, and you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Lina, so much. I have so many notes on the left, on the right, on the computer. And I don't even know where to start, but I think I'm glad that it's a small group, it's a dynamic group, and this is an amazing, amazing opportunity to brainstorm on how do we move further, right, away from patriarchy, as you said. How do we move closer to intersectionality and women's rights and a true feminist movement? And thank you for that introduction. I always feel like I'm the new kid on the block. I've only been in this work for the last 10 years, but it's been the best 10 years of just looking up to all of you, younger women too, who have all these incredible resumes that I'm like, how did I miss all this in my younger years? Anyway, here we are. Here we are, and you are absolutely right. First of all, the fact that this is coming out of the MENA region is really significant and important to highlight, right? And you all know I'm going to come from that global perspective, because that's what I've been doing for 10 years, NGO CSW, which is bringing the voices of feminist movement into the CSW process, bringing your demands, your difficulties, your successes to the CSW process. And I don't have to tell you that it is not a very successful endeavor. We do the best we can. And I'm the first one to say that. And again, I don't want to keep talking about NGO CSW, but we have quadrupled in the last even several years, which means that there's a hunger and need to be heard at the global level. And we take that very seriously. But how do we really make sure that your voices are heard and that changes are happening at the global level? That's something to be discussed, obviously, but we're not giving up. And I'm going to connect that to the GEF process and also why these national mechanisms are so important, because we know, and even governments say it, and of course, it doesn't matter what governments say, they say a lot of stuff. I'm not going to curse, I promise. This is being recorded, so I'll keep it very simple and say, they do say a lot of things, but do they actually implement them? Do they actually mean it? Are they using feminism for their political gains, right? Are they using our movement to look good and to get the financing? As Dr. Salman said earlier, and first of all, that's just amazing on example. The Jordanian National Commission is an amazing example that should be duplicated and taught everywhere, right? So we're doing the best we can, and we're not finding the success, not at the global level, not at the national level, sometimes in some local levels, right? So that's the closest to the national level. Now, the reason why I said MENA region is so important, I don't have to explain to you all, you live there. It is one of the most volatile areas that, you know, it's just, I can't even wrap my head around how we convince people these principles are important when all they're worried about is their electricity, their food, their security, their education. There's so many levels of discrepancies that, you know, sometimes I can see that. I mean, I was born in Beirut, Lebanon. I don't know if everybody knows that. And I'm Armenian, so I have a lot of this background that has shaped me to saying, you know, when you're discriminated against, when your rights at all levels are taken away from you, how do you fight to say that this specific principle, women's rights, feminist rights, is really the way that we can balance out all those other discrepancies? So having said that now, so we're doing the best we can at CSW and not finding success. And here we go, UN Women decides that Generation Equality Forum is a new twist to the conversation. And I actually signed up from day one because I thought, you know, people have always questioned why NGO CSW or me personally would support a process like GEF when there is a CSW. And this is exactly, that's where I'm going to make the connection. This is exactly why the Amman principles come in too. That's why it's important, because even if it's your own baby, even if it's something that you're working on, if you see that it's not working, it is important to collaborate, brainstorm, and bring in new ideas on how to get the job done. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing. Those of us on the same page of feminist intersectional approach to a better world, we want the same thing. And we need, and I think Mosna said this as well very well, that it is so important that we keep collaborating in a transparent and shared leadership model. Those of us those of you who have been coming to our meetings, you know that it's like almost like a broken record. I keep saying that, I keep trying to model that, and one day we will succeed where within the civil society, we are working together in a transparent shared leadership model where there's no competition for successes and for funds, and you know there's this feeling of abundance and not scarcity. So when the GEF process started, I thought, what a great way to show the CSW process that you're not the only game in town. There's other ways that we can do this, right? And we did the best we could. And of course, COVID and the pandemic, as you all know, challenged us in so many ways and also helped us in so many ways, in my opinion. I think virtually we were able to gather more voices and educate and bring more members on board that were listening to us than had we done it in person. So the GF process is done, the forums are done, we have $40 billion. I mean, when people talk about finances, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping back and forth, but this is how my brain works, and I hope you can follow it. And I hope the translation is keeping up with my fast talking, because I get really passionate about this. But I always say that if it's really money that you need, the money is there. And I know that sounds very flippant or first world or, you know, entitled, but sometimes it's not just money that you need. You need the creative approach, you need the ideas, you need the ways that you can truly show a difference. Because I have seen so much money go around to different organizations, including civil society, that somehow it doesn't really translate into true action and movement. And that's why I think it's so important that we keep gathering this way. We keep rethinking, what is it that we're actually trying to achieve? How can we achieve it? And how do we make sure that all the disciplines, all the mandates that we're putting down are actionable and doable? And this obviously is part of the Amman principles as well, because you want implementation, you want accountability, all of that needs to be there. It's one of the reasons why CSW doesn't work. CSW is just a recommendation, right? I mean, who's checking what's happening after we fight so hard for commas and words and certain impressions that are supposed to be in the outcome document? And you might have heard me last year, I was so disappointed after all the hard work we put into it. So why do I need this stacks of paper that we fought so hard and we didn't gain any true change, right? Like, it was, even the words that we had agreed upon were removed. It's like you can just wrap fish in that paper. I don't need it. You know, what is that paper if we can't really do anything about it? So I want to make sure that we all keep that in mind as well. So now we have these action coalitions that came out of the Generation Equality Forum, and of course the Peace and Security as well. What do we do now? It is unfortunate that we still have no idea. We don't have, we do, and it's on the website on what UN Women is trying to do, the mechanisms that they're trying to put into place that will be transparent, that will be collaborative, and it is multi-stakeholder. Civil society, it was from day one on the table and will stay on the table. And that is really important because, as you know, at CSW, we're still fighting. And this year we have some hope that we're going to be on the table, but I'm not holding my breath, even though I'm going to keep trying. So to be able to be on the table, to be able to bring the private sector who has the money, wants to bring in the money, and that we have to hold them accountable for how they spend their money and who is that private sector that is coming into our space. So I think it's really important, and I don't know how many minutes I talked. I think I still have a few more minutes, but I think it's really important that these types of principles that are researched, that's coming from powerful intersectional feminist lens, especially, I'm going to bring it back to MENA region again, is so important to bring to the global level. Now, the question is, who else is doing similar things? What's happening in other regions? Because we do know there's feminist movements in all regions. And we're so proud that Lena is actually our liaison to the MENA region at the NGO-CSW level. And you all know NGO-CSW has regional representations who are amazing as well. So how does this translate into the global level, into other regions? What are other regions doing? I don't think that one should be better or worse or more important than the other. I think it is really important that everybody looks at what came out of a region like MENA and why, and who is writing these principles and who is really recommending for them to be implemented and hold accountable is really important. Because even in our own circles, and I'm sure you all know that, I've been really, I think when people say what disappoints you the most, is it that there's not enough money? Is it that member states are not listening to you? All of that really is part of my challenges, but my worst disappointment is really when I see fake feminism, is the way I'm going to say it right now off the top of my head. Women who are infiltrating our movements and really not allowing us to speak the way we do. Now, of course, nobody can stop us from saying and doing what we want to do, but because I like to work with inclusivity, with collaboration, with transparency, when I say there's a whole group behind me, right, at NGO-CSW New York. We have been unfortunately infiltrated way too many times, and we are still being infiltrated by feminist, quote unquote, feminist activists who don't have our best interest at heart, who are working with the patriarchy mechanism rather than true feminist mechanism. So and that to me is the most disappointing part, because when you step into a space where you think it's safe, and thank you, Lina, for saying that we are aiming to create that safe space, doesn't mean we always succeed, because we also don't want to be closed off, right? We need to keep that conversation happening. Even if we don't agree, we're supposed to have this conversation so that we can influence each other. And then, of course, you have these issues of really undermining what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to wrap up by saying that kudos to all of you. I am so honored to be here. Thank you, Lina, for inviting me, for listening in on what you're all doing. We must bring this conversation to not only globally, which is why I'm here, but also first to have these conversations in different regions to compare and contrast and to learn from each other and to tweak what it is that we're doing for utmost success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Huri. Everything that you say resonates, and of course, especially when you say fake feminism, and what does it mean? It means basically no feminist at all. A feminism that is not intersectional, a feminism that is inclusive, a feminism that reproduces the agenda, the conservative agenda of regimes, and this resonates so much in the MENA region. It's and this is the first level of the battle that we have to deal with day in and day out. And I will take you up on your offer to take this further, especially that we have started the preparations for the next CSW, and I'm hoping with our friends and colleagues at SIGI, FES, our speakers, that we will be able to kind of go as a united front to the CSW and deal with the post-Jeff. We have a few questions, and maybe I can give the floor to each one of you to respond to this. Muzen, as you know, you have a fan base here, and Muntaha is one of them, our colleague Muntaha from Libya. She's asking you specifically to you this question: how can we ensure gender equality on a national level if those in higher positions do not aim to accomplish this, i.e. when the system itself is patriarchal? What are the recommended actions in your opinion? And if I may, I think also Muntaha's question maybe is kind of informed by the context in Libya.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you, Muntaha. I do think that one of the main issues about being a feminist in this region, that we know that those people don't want to ensure what we want to ensure. أنا كنت بتكلم عربي. هي الفكرة كده إنه إحنا عارفين من الأول إنه الناس دي مش بتحب مش هي أبوية بامتياز، وأظن ده جزء من الرحلة النسوية طول الوقت، والإدراك للمساحات المختلفة. علشان كده أنا شايفة طول الوقت إنه البنى في حركة نسوية متقاطعة واسعة، مش centralized في مكان ولا على قضية واحدة، هو الوسيلة الوحيدة لتحقيق process جوه المنظومة الأبوية دي، وبأدوات مختلفة. حتى أنا بسمع هوري وهي بتتكلم حوالين innovative ideas، وده شيء مهم طول الوقت. إحنا أظن مهم إن إحنا نبقى فاهمين إنه هي قضية صعبة مش سهلة، فإلى أي حد استخدام أدوات مختلفة هو شيء مهم، علشان ما حدش فينا عنده الحل. لو حد فينا عنده الحل ما كناش بقينا قاعدين دلوقتي فاتحين البلورة ومش عارفين نعمل ايه في المنطقة دي. فأظن ان ده جزء من الحاجات المهمة كمان في إدراك البروسيس. حاجة تانية انه إدراك ان احنا بنتعامل مع ناس أبوية، بس كمان إدراك انه the definition of power مش زي ما احنا متصورين. power is also multi-layered. فmaybe احنا مبين ما عندناش power، بس احنا عندنا power ما. how to use it and how to build on it. مش عارفة لو قلت حاجة logic ولا لا.
Atul. Let me take my second question to, let me take it to Selma. The second question is about youth and, you know, the role that, that youth played in the Arab region in social movements, in organizing, in playing a leadership role, in framing issues and demands that are intersectional and feminist. So how do you see the, you know, and maybe from your perspective, Selma, where you are active within the national women machinery, how do you see the role of young activists at a time when there's so much despair in our region, as you know? I mean, definitely for Lebanon, but I think for other countries as well. How would you address this within the framework of, you know, your role?
Well, I totally agree that, and I think there is a trend now where we believe that the youth are actually going to lead the change. I mean, we've done our best, but I do not think you will see real change happening in our time. You know, in a deconstructionist way. We are moving in a space of a limited space of maneuvering, to be honest. And this is what governments have done to us. They created this concept of empowerment, you know, economic empowerment, you know, loans, I don't know, inclusivity. But in the end, you know, there is no deconstruction for anything, for the basis of all what's happening. And there was a window of opportunity that I saw last year, or maybe the year before, because, you know, we've lost a year. It's an important moment when we had a demonstration when a woman lost her eyes by her husband. And the youth called for a sit-in the streets, demonstration.
Yes.
And remember the group, we have this small group on WhatsApp. It's a group that we had when we abolished 308. And they started telling me, proposing, civil society, that Selma, why don't we try to give them what slogans they should use? We have to manage what's going to happen on the street. And I told them, you know what? Why are you asking JNCW to do that? Why, you know, you are against JNCW leading civil society, and you want me now to go to the youth and tell them what to say? So let them be. Let them go. Let them break the taboos. Let them say what we are not able to say. Huri was talking about, yes, sometimes our language is conformist. Our language, we censor ourselves because maybe they will say JNCW is doing that and civil society is a foreign agenda. So we're always self-censoring. And then the youth went up and they mentioned patriarchy. And they started mentioning, you know, I mean, there were slogans that were breaking the taboos that civil society, women movement have put to themselves in order to remain in the field, no, not to be closed on. And then it, of course, backfired. The youth were attacked and women movement was attacked. JNCW was attacked. I went on TV and they asked me, why didn't you control the language? And I said, I'm not going to control the language. This is not my job. Yet, what I saw is that, yes, the youth still are unable to develop the language. So they are out, passionate, they believe in equality, they're feminists, but they haven't studied feminism. So what we're working now, and I see other civil society organizations who are doing, is reaching out for these youth, trying to give them the knowledge, not to control their position, but give them the knowledge. What is feminism? What is Arab feminism? What happened in the context? How is, you know, not everything, not feminism, not all feminism is white feminism. Not all feminism is radical feminism. Not all feminism is neoliberal feminism. And then you have to decide what your choices are. And then you have to present the issues from your own local context. We want, and now we have a project, it's a very small pilot project, that we want to work with youth who have already been working from Tafile, from Eastern Amman. I'm talking from the most marginalized areas, who are working with a youth organization, already sensitized, and we are going to be working with them on this. And then we want these people to start going on TV and talking about child marriage. We want them to be talking about, you know, these issues from their own context with a deep understanding of feminism. We need to equip them without controlling them. And there is a possibility. There are several organizations who are working on that. But I want to be honest, to be kind of reserved about how the UN system is using the youth. I feel the UN system, with he for she and, generation equality, it's all like in the context of the UN. The UN system is sometimes, I feel like, is creating kind of a setup for the youth to be there, but not to ingrain. Look at how this is ingrained within the situation. On the other hand, we have youth who are completely assimilated by the system, by the patriarchy, and by the authority, and fed what to attack us. And they are the ones who are attacking us on social media. So we have these two groups, and we need to see how we can also reach out and change the narrative in order to get them on board with us. But I think they are the change. They should, and what we reflect, what is reflected in the youth is what's reflected in our realities, is that the women movement now is not completely working with the political movement, the reform, the left movement. The left see us as the neoliberal, and we as, and then the left doesn't want to work with the women movement, although we're not neoliberals. Most of us are coming from the left. So, but yet they see us as the Western feminism, so they're not working with us. And without joining the political with the feminism, and I think Huri was mentioning it, or Lina, I don't remember now, or Muz, we will continue to be isolated and we will not create real change.
Salma, thank you for your sobering notes. And I must say, I really agree with you. I'll come back to that, but I know that Muzen went back for higher studies, which we're all very happy with. So I'm going to jump to a question, I think, to you, Muzen. What policies and mechanism can feminist organizations, and I would say also machineries, national machineries, can use under authoritarian context? Of course, we don't know what is an authoritarian context. Just figure it out hypothetically. What is an authoritarian?
Hypothetically, something we don't live and we don't know at all.
No,
I
no.
know.
Just
I know. For other people, those other people.
Imagine Sweden.
حرام. Yeah. I do think
عربي
إنه واحدة من الحاجات المهمة في النقاش حوالين آليات الحركة في أوقات الضعف، مش أوقات يعني المساحات العامة، يعني هو النقاش العميق. وده اللي كنت حبيت أقوله لما جيت أتكلم حوالين الدور بتاع الحركة نفسها والنسويات في الموضوع. ساعات في الأوقات دي بنبقى كنسويات كمان عندنا حالة الابتزاز الذاتي، إن إحنا مش مهمات والمهم الأخريات. أظن أقوى حاجة تقدر تبقى يعني نعمل عليها فريمينج طول الوقت في الأنظمة الغير ديمقراطية والأبوية بطبعها، يعني وجود أفعالها أبوية. وما بقصدش بس بالأنظمة هم من يحكموا ده، اللي هم حتى اللي بيحكموا الخطاب السياسي، الخطاب الإعلامي، لأن كل دي باور. ده إنه يبقى فيه تركيز حقيقي حوالين المساحات الآمنة للنسويات للتواجد، لأنه ده، وإنه سواء المساحات دي واسعة أو صغيرة، ده شيء مهم. وأظن ده جزء من دور الآليات الوطنية طول الوقت ودور المجتمع الدولي، إنه يسيب المساحة لهؤلاء النسويات أو النساء أو الأجيال الأصغر إن هي تقدر تتحرك في مساحات آمنة، لأنه أظن دي الآلية الأساسية. وعشان كده أظن دي قيمة إن إحنا نبقى نسويات. سؤال التضامن اللي هو متعدد القارات والمساحات، وده وزي ما هوري كانت بتقول مش فكرة الناس تبقى entitled أو كده، إن هو ده سؤال التضامن وتواجد المساحات. ده أظن من الآليات المهمة. تاني حاجة تواجد مساحات طول الوقت لنقاش وسماع أجيال مختلفة عن اليوجوال ساسبكتس. طول الوقت في إشكالية إنه أما تبقى حركاتنا يعني في أنظمة غير ديمقراطية، معناها إن الحركة عددها أقل فنسمع أصوات أقل. بالعكس، ده بيولد نقاش ومساحات عند ناس بره الصور النمطية. أظن ده دورنا طول الوقت، مش بس الآليات الوطنية والمجتمع الدولي، إنه يسمح لناس بره التصور النمطي على إن هم يبقوا موجودات. يعني يمكن دول عندهم الحل أكتر من اللي تعودوا على الفريمينج، أو حتى اللي تعودوا على التارجتينج أو أي حاجة من الحاجات دي. وأنا آسفة جدًا، متشكرة جدًا، جدًا، جدًا على الدعوة، بس أنا يعني طالبة على كبر، فمحتاجة إن أنا ألحق الكلاس بتاعي.
موفقة.
شكرًا، شكرًا.
I have one question which I want to direct to Huri, and then I have a personal question to Ibtisam, if I may, and then perhaps I can ask Farah and Shahad to close this amazing conversation. Huri, the question is again about financial resources and how complicated it is to mobilize resources for nationwide gender equality initiatives in a context such as the Arab region. And I'm directing this question to you because we were both at Jeff in Paris in July, and we both came out with the impression that there's money all around us, and all you have to do is grab it and then put it to good use. So what are your thoughts on this when it comes to the Arab region?
Yes, I'm always putting my foot in my mouth when I say there's money if you want it, but then how do you get it, right? And also, where do you get it from? And that's one of the biggest issues right now that UN Women actually has to deal with when it comes to the GEF money. Now, we know that the 40 billion is not in UN Women Bank, right? We know that a lot of that money is already money allocated for gender equality at the government level or different levels. But we do also know that there is commitment from certain organizations like Gates, like Ford, like, who have earned so much money based on actually our work in some ways, right? So I think it's really important that we keep an eye on also not only where is the money, but who's getting the money and how it's being used. And that's one of the issues why UN Women is taking so long to really make their process public, because they're doing way too much consultation, but it's never too much, right? And civil society is part of that conversation as well, is that how do we put this all to make it transparent, for example, on a website that shows where is the money, who's using it, and how it's being used. So once that mechanism becomes public, I think I'm hoping, again, I'm always an optimist. No matter how many times I get disappointed, I keep thinking, there's got to be a better way of doing this. But I want to go back to the money issue in a way that says, first of all, it's so important to know what you're spending the money on. How are you going to spend it? Obviously, I mean, you all have applied for grants and you know how that works. But I'm going beyond just the grant mandate. I'm challenging the feminist movement to think about making this issue all about the money. Again, everybody needs money to live on. I'm not the richest person in the world. I have a budget on my own personal living expenses as well. But at the same time, I also know that there's definitely different ways. And even with NGO CSW, for example, when we're putting on the forum, we're supposed to make $100,000 and $150,000 a year just to survive as NGO CSW New York. When we were meeting in person, that was pretty easy to do because we would have consultation day, reception, and we renting out rooms and all of that. Now it's all virtual. How do we make that much money? So because we can't, we have to keep rethinking on how it is that we're implementing our program, right? So, and again, this is nothing new I'm sharing with you, and anybody who has organized, has led a program knows that you have to be light on your feet, as we say, and just always rethink your approach. So I challenge everyone to think, how much money do we need to have a campaign? How much money do we need to actually put on the ground to help people, right? And I know in the MENA region is a huge challenge, because you don't even have the mechanisms like a banking or system that you can actually distribute money with. So how do you do when there's war? How do you do all of that? Those are challenges that I'm not taking lightly, but I'm just putting on the table the idea of what do we need the money for? How much do we need it? And how do we really implement it if we don't have the money that we would all love to have?
Thank you, Huri, for your honesty and your candor. I'm always happy when you're with us. I want to direct the last question to Dr. Ebtissam. And I want to go back to the text of the Amman principles. What do you think is needed so that they are ready to be kind of presented, for some sort of consultation and implementation beyond civil society? Are we talking about are we talking about a text that already represents a global agreement and different different inputs and so on? This is what where are we in the process?
Thank you for the question. Thank you very much. It's indeed a very important one. But if you allow me a minute to reflect on one of the other important questions that was discussed about how do we work within an authoritarian context. I think the question accepts authoritarianism within the region as a fate. And there is a problem with this particular logic. I think the Amman principles is, in a way, an invitation to rethink the state through a feminist lens and redefine the state through a feminist lens, reclaim the Arab state through a feminist lens. The Amman principles are an invitation to infiltrate the state structure, redefine it from a feminist perspective so that it is just, it is democratic, and it is inclusive. In the Amman principles and in the entire attempt to save state feminism from patriarchal, authoritative regimes in the Arab world, the women's movement has to really consider, again, reclaiming this particular space, the national machineries, in order to diffuse this concentration of power that defines authoritarianism, and enshrine in the constitution and in law a distribution of resources and a reallocation of resources so that the state reflects the needs and the interests of women. So my invitation is for us to think of this project as a project that re-envisions the Arab state beyond authoritarianism and rethink the Arab state through a feminist lens. Where are we in terms of the project? I think we're ready. So the principles are ready. The principles were made on the basis of systematic research, global consultations, regional consultations, national consultations. We're hoping that the audience in this particular session take those principles and share them with as wide as possible. We're hoping that you could provide us with your feedback, critical comments, revisions, reflections, so that we can also incorporate your views into the structure of the Amman principles and the process that follows. We're hoping that the principles themselves could be introduced to the UN Women, that the UN Women adapts the principles, and then a global initiative should start to translate those initiatives into concrete indicators that are measurable. that are measurable, that everybody sees themselves reflected in those particular indicators. So the indicators and the principles can become institutionalized and housed within the UN Women. Why the UN Women? Because the UN Women has always been that particular site where national missionaries found their entry point into the UN system. It is that particular location where the UN, where the national missionaries find a home within the UN structure. So this is where we're at. And this is where we're hoping to go with those particular principles. So we're looking forward to your critical reflections, insights, comments, and we're moving forward with your support and whatever support that you can provide us with to present them at the UN level and have them adapted at the UN level so that the further work can start on the realization and implementation.
Thank you so much, Ibtisam. And I think that's a good way to conclude, because we have a clear picture of where we are and where we would like to go. Certainly, as the Asfari Institute at the American University of Beirut, we're definitely committed with SIGI, with Friedrich-Ebert, and certainly with NGO CSW New York to to push forward for the next steps. I just want to add that UN Women was supposed to be with us from the regional office. They were supposed to be with us, but today our colleague from UN Women told us that she can't be end of the year. But anyway, we will. We are good at stalking, and we will have a face-to-face with UN Women, because I really think, as you said, and again, Ibtisam, thank you for this concluding remark, this is about reclaiming the state that we want, a state that is responsible, a state that is feminist, a state that is inclusive of everybody, a state that does not criminalize the LGBTQ community, a state that does not allow girls to be married, a state that does not condone violence against women. This is the governance that we want, basically, and I'm sure that is one of the important tools. And again, before I leave the floor to Farah and Shahid for their last words, I really want to again circle back to our wonderful friend Asma Khadr, and really wish she would have been with us, especially that, again, it's during conversations with people like Asma that things happen. So thank you also very much on behalf of the American University of Beirut, and it will not be long before we see you again. Farah?
Thank you so much, Lina. And thank you, Selma and Ibtisam and Houri and Muzan for such a wonderful conversation. You really highlighted the complexities in which we have to work within. And I hope that, as Ibtisam said, the Amman principles are one way to kind of counter this complexity and simplify our struggle. Thank you also for the interpreters from Language Platform and for, of course, SIGI and Asfari for organizing this event today. I hope that all of you stay engaged with the project and help us continue to formulate ideas and ways that we can really take this to the global level. And as you said, Houri, I think our conclusion might be today that we need to go to CSW in a united front. So I hope this will happen, and thank you all so much for taking the time today.
Thank you, and I remind you that this conversation is going to remain available and open source. And definitely from our end, we will be using it both for teaching and also for activism. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Yalla, bye.